Larry, here is what Mertz said.
Is willing to discuss territorial questions, but then the contact line needs to be the starting point, and legal recognition of Russian-occupied territory is not part of discussion.
Is not part of discussion. How do you see the pressure, the way that Europeans are somehow trying to put pressure on Trump?
What, other than, not calling him daddy? and they have no means to pressure. They have no leverage. They are, as my old Marine Corps boss at State Department, he retired as an 06 out of the Marine Corps. He used to say, they're as useless as tits on a boar hog. You know what? And I mean, really, who cares what Fred Mertz says? Well, okay, Lucy and Desi Arnaz, they cared what Fred Mertz said. That's a joke that you won't understand, Nima, because if you didn't grow up watching I Love Lucy, they had a character named Fred Mertz. So every time I hear Friedrich Mertz in Germany, I go, oh, he's back, a rerun. No, they have nothing. They don't control resources. They're not producing any critical military technology. So, and they don't have an army to speak of, so what good are they? And so he can sit there and pout, hold his breath. We've already established that Germany is the vassal of the United States because we blew up their pipeline. We blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. We cut off their supply of cheap natural gas. We're forcing them to buy natural gas from us, and they just roll over and take it. And, they don't push back. So how can you take a guy like that seriously?
Just to add to that, Nima, I think this is lovely, frankly, because we've had people from the true power structure, the deep state, we call it, try this before to get actually into political power. I think of Hank Paulson. I think of Timothy Geithner. I can think of others. But this guy comes from the epitome of the deep state and has put himself into the forward-leaning political process, come out of the dark, as it were. And he's going to be majorly rebuffed. I overjoy. That's what Mertz is.
Yeah.
BlackRock CEO.
I don't know if you saw this article that the German Analytical Institute reported that as of May 2025, Europe's military industrial production for Ukraine surpassed that of the United States by 35.1 billion, compared to the United States is 30.7 billion. And I would be somehow surprised, Larry, what are they trying to provide Ukraine with? What's that? It's about drones? I don't know, about missiles? What are they trying to provide?
So what Ukraine needs is a competent air defense system. Germany doesn't produce that. France doesn't produce that. England doesn't produce that. Hell, the United States doesn't produce that. We got the Patriot, we got the THAAD, we got some high-priced equipment, but that's not very effective and certainly not cost-effective. They're still not producing enough artillery shells. So, I'd say that kind of report, it's like a distraction. It's like they're missing the point. Right now, Russia is breaking through the last formidable defensive lines that Ukraine has. Once Russia finishes penetrating those, probably within the next 2 to 3 weeks, then Ukraine doesn't have the ability to stop Russia going all the way to the Dnieper. Think about this. Russia, when they started the special military operation, they took control of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. So that power, they're right up they're at the far western edge of the eastern part of Ukraine. They're right up against the river. To go across the river, then they'd be in the western part of Ukraine. They've been there for 3.5 years. Ukraine has been unable to dislodge the Russians from that nuclear power plant. Why is that? So, we've seen repeatedly that Ukraine's pretty good at defending some of these lines, but right now they're finding they don't have enough personnel to put in those trenches and in those bunkers. And then Russia's just starting to go around them or swarming them. So this thing, I think, it's coming to a more rapid conclusion than many had anticipated. And I just want to pull my hair out when I hear people talk about a frozen conflict. Yeah, please. Stalemate, not quite. So we're I think watching the terminal stage. So it doesn't matter what Europe does. Okay, so they're producing more than the United States right now. Okay, what are they producing that could even make a difference on the ground? The answer to that's nothing.
New York Times was full of that this morning. You see these words like stalemate, frozen conflict, battle lines that haven't moved. Where have they been?
Yeah.
Where are they right now? Well, I can tell you in part, they've just destroyed their international teams, from the Los Angeles newspapers to the New York newspapers to the Washington Post. They've destroyed their international teams, and those people that they do have remaining are not permitted to go to the battle zones. And this started with Biden. And I think it was intentional. I think they knew a scintilla of the truth about Russia, as Larry was saying, but they didn't want Americans to know anything about that, and certainly not our media. So they restricted all of that. You couldn't do it. It's like Netanyahu. If you don't go in there and you don't see the atrocities and the starvation, that's good for Israel. So you kill all of the journalists.
Yeah.
Larry, do we have any sort of sign that Russia wanted to go to the western part of Ukraine and they were somehow, because right now it seems the Trump administration spreading that they wanted to capture all of Ukraine. We've stopped that. Is the rhetoric to be the win discussion on the...
Yeah, again, there's been so much propaganda from the outset. When Russia launched the special military operation in February 2022, they did so with between 75,000 and 125,000 troops. But with those, they got immediate control of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. They moved tanks into position north of Kyiv. And they actually sent some patrols into Kyiv. But all of this was designed to push Ukraine to the negotiating table, which it did. And they were actually having successful negotiations until the United States and the United Kingdom interfered, told Zelensky in no uncertain terms, shut it down, don't do it, which he did. And from that point on, then Russia had to reappraise its approach. But it's still, there was never the ambition to conquer the rest of Ukraine to the east, to the west of the river. But I personally believe they will take Kyiv because of Kyiv's historical importance as the birthplace of Russia. It was not Moscow, it was Kyiv, and more than 1,000 years ago, which was also coincided with the baptism into Christianity that took place. So, I mean, it's important historically from that standpoint. But Russia's got plenty, these people that push, Russia's wants to conquer Europe. For what? They have to take responsibility for all these people running around with purple, orange hair? Are you kidding? God.
Or all these nasty people in Poland?
Yeah. Oh, my Lord.
Colonel, I think that the United States under the Trump administration has reached its limitation to put pressure not only on Russia, but also on India, China, the BRICS countries. That's why we see Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, coming out and talking about Europeans. I have never heard Bessent talking this way toward Europeans. Here is what he said on Fox News.
It is time for our European counterparts to put up or shut up. They keep saying, oh, the U.S. should do this, U.S. should do that. President Trump has put secondary sanctions or secondary tariffs on India because of their consumption of Russian oil, and the Europeans haven't done that yet. As a matter of fact, the Europeans are buying the refined products that the Indian refiners make. So we need some coordination here. So if we are going to have a united front, which will give President Trump maximum leverage, then I think that our European counterparts need to do their part.
So he simply says there is nothing else that we can do to put pressure on Russia. How do you find it, the way that he's talking toward European? Do you think that he's somehow trying to convince them, who he's trying to put pressure on them? We know that the Europeans, they trying to call Trump daddy, as Larry mentioned, but they are playing a theater, in my opinion.
I think it's a kabuki theater, really. And I'll tell you something else. I had a conversation 2 days ago with a group of people who were working in New York to get the United Nations General Assembly to act under the charter, because there are things the UNGA can do under the charter. They're very unknown, if you will, except in esoteric diplomatic circles, because we've never really used them in a forceful way. They're trying to get the UNGA and get Mahmoud Abbas, which I objected to. I said we need a better person than that, to request of the UNGA a vote. It only takes a 2/3 vote, and then you have something called a protective force that's deployed to Gaza. And it would be under what I call Chapter 6, Chapter 7, but more the force peace enforcement scenario than the peacekeeping scenario, which we're more accustomed to. Under peace enforcement, you set up some rules of engagement, and they generally are two-pronged. One, if you're in jeopardy, this is a soldier with a blue helmet, you shoot. You shoot with those are the rules of engagement. And two, your job is to enforce a peace regardless of those standing in your way. So it has to be a very robust force. The charter actually made provision for the creation of 100,000 plus standing force that would be under the Secretary General. Of course, the United States Congress didn't like that, but it's in the charter. All to say, the movement is going to receive enormous impetus from Bibi's atrocities. And I could see a scenario like this, Nima. Let's move the UN headquarters from New York City to Shanghai. Let's go over there where they have fast trains that can get you all around anywhere you want to go in reasonable comfort, even in plush comfort, if you're a diplomat with money. And China could take over the dues that the United States, under Reagan, for example, threatened and then did pull, which would really hurt the UN, and even plus them up somewhat. The world is changing. And that would be, in my view, a wise move for China, ultimately, because one, they believe in the UN. Two, they're willing to support the more esoteric parts of the charter. And three, it's time. It's time the empire were taught a lesson in reality. Let's move the UN headquarters somewhere else, and let's get it out of New York and that dirty city, as Donald Trump is always talking about. Those are the kinds of things that show imagination. And not only that, they conform with the reality of this massive power shift which is taking place, which, Nima, is why we're doing what we're doing. As incoherent as it is, that's why we're doing it, because the people behind the government understand, the billionaires, they understand that if they don't disturb this shift of power, disturb it majorly, and the conduit is Russia and Central Asia, and the magnet is China. If they don't disturb that majorly, we're toast.
Larry, Donald Trump is talking about that the second meeting would be with Zelensky. And you've mentioned who can imagine Zelensky going to Russia. Maybe they're thinking of the second meeting in Alaska again. And here is what he said, Larry, before going to your comment.
With President Putin tomorrow, I think it's going to be a good meeting, but the more important meeting will be the second meeting that we're having. We're going to have a meeting with President Putin, President Zelensky, myself, and maybe we'll bring some of the European leaders along, maybe not. I don't know that it's going to be very important. We're going to see what happens.
It's just somehow a fantasy, in my opinion, to have.
Yeah, no, it's, I think attributed, I'll be charitable and say it's just misdirection. You know, he's saying that to, feed the neocons and the Europeans what they want to hear, and has no intention of following through. I mean, we've seen time after time that he's made threats, promises, set deadlines, never fulfilled. With the latest being, the bone-crushing sanctions that were going to be applied to China and to India. All he did was piss off the Indians and convince them, yeah, we need to accelerate building up BRICS and canceling contracts to purchase F-35 jets from the United States and other aircraft, and not having any consultations with the Department of Defense like had previously been scheduled. So, Trump wanting that, it's fantasy because Zelensky may actually become irrelevant within the next 2 to 3 weeks. We can't never underestimate the ability of the United States to get rid of those that we put into power. Just go back to Vietnam, ask Diem. Well, you can't. If you're going to ask him, take a shovel. Okay, you have to dig him up. Muammar Gaddafi.
Yeah.
Saddam Hussein, Manuel Noriega. I mean, Saddam was a partner of ours at one point, and we were supplying him with the chemicals for making the chemical weapons. Manuel Noriega was a CIA source. He was an asset. And then got to the point where he was no longer an asset. So, we dispose of these people. And, Zelensky foolishly climbed into bed with us because, I don't think he's going to have the luxury of fleeing the country with suitcases stuffed with dollars to some safe haven in southern France or England. I think he will be likely not get out alive, but we'll see.
And let me just say, Nima, I agree with that 100%. And I think Zelensky blew it. He really blew it when he exceeded at it just after Istanbul. If he'd gone ahead with that, he'd be in a lot better position right now.
Right.
Much better. Yeah.
Colonel, do you feel that Zelensky somehow can stay in power in Ukraine, or Russia would ask the Trump administration to do something about it?
I think the Ukrainians will do something about it once this settles a little bit and we see what comes out of Alaska and what follows. I think the Ukrainians will do something about it. I think they'll get rid of him. Remember, I dealt with Ukraine from 2002 to 2005, and I watched the volatility of the leadership. I watched the machinations that went on and the different people that flew in and out of power. That's more typical Ukraine than what we've had now with this stability with Zelensky there for some time. And the war did that. The war did that. Once the war is settled, so to speak, and I think it's more to be settled quicker than many people think, at least in terms of the fighting stopping, then he's gone, I think. Now, let me add that the other thing I learned about Ukraine, and not just from that experience with them up close and personal, but also reading about their history, particularly during World War II and World War I and before that, they are some of the best guerrilla fighters in the world. So if there is some instability in Ukraine post-agreement, whatever that might be, it'll be Ukraine's fault, not the Russians.
Yeah.